subscribe and tap the bell right now. Today, twice a day, we bring you the real code of the samurai, not paraphrased, never softened. Inazo Nitobe describes the ideal samurai temperament in a single sentence that's worth reading slowly. A truly brave man is ever serene. He is never taken by surprise. Nothing ruffles the equanimity of his spirit. Notice what that sentence doesn't say. It doesn't say a brave man suppresses his panic well. It doesn't say he manages to look calm despite feeling chaotic underneath. It says plainly that the surprise itself simply doesn't land, that the disturbance most people feel automatically when pressure hits simply doesn't register the same way in a mind trained the way Bushido demanded. That's a considerably higher bar than most modern advice about staying calm actually sets, and it's worth understanding exactly how the samurai class actually believed a person genuinely got there. The first thing to understand is that this serenity was never treated as a personality trait some warriors happen to be born with. Bushido assumed the opposite, that composure under real pressure has to be built, deliberately, the same way a sword technique gets built, through repeated exposure to smaller versions of the exact conditions that eventually test it. A samurai wasn't expected to simply will himself calm in the middle of a duel. He was expected to have already spent years exposing himself, on purpose, to control fear, control discomfort, and control provocation, so that by the time a real crisis arrived, his nervous system had already been through something close to it many times before. Miyamoto Musashi's approach to the Ganryūjima duel, which we've covered in full in an earlier video, is a clean example of this principle in action. He arrived deliberately late, armed with a bokken he'd carved from a spare oar during the crossing, facing a renowned swordsman with every reason to be furious and unsettled by the wait. Every single choice Musashi made in the hours before that fight was carefully designed to disturb his opponent's composure while keeping his own perfectly, visibly intact, and the fact that he could execute a plan this deliberate, under this much pressure, tells you his calm wasn't improvised in the moment. It had already been rehearsed, dozens of times, across a career that started with a duel at 13 years old. This connects to something Bushido understood about panic that's easy to miss. Panic is rarely a response to the actual danger in front of you. It's a response to how much of that danger feels unfamiliar. A threat you've mentally rehearsed in advance, even imperfectly and only once, produces a mere fraction of the disruption an identical threat produces when it catches you completely by surprise instead. This is why samurai mental training places so much deliberate emphasis on imagining worst-case outcomes in calm, controlled settings, well before any real crisis was anywhere near at hand, not to frighten themselves unnecessarily, but to make the eventual real version of that same outcome feel, on some level, like something already lived through once before, rather than an entirely new threat encountered for the very first time. There's also a specific discipline worth pulling directly from Hagakure here, the later samurai text built around accepting death daily. Its central exercise, deciding, in a calm morning, exactly how you respond to the worst thing that could happen to you that day, isn't really about death specifically. It's a general method for stripping the unfamiliar edge off of fear before it ever gets the chance to ambush you. Apply the exact same method to whatever real pressure you happen to be facing right now, whether it's a difficult conversation, a public failure, or some ongoing risk you keep quietly avoiding, and the same mechanism applies. Rehearse the outcome deliberately, in a moment when nothing is actually at stake, and the real version arrives considerably less able to unsettle you. None of this means the fear disappears entirely, and to its credit, Bushido never once claimed that it actually would. What changes is what that fear is allowed to do once it shows up. An untrained mind lets fear make decisions, it flinches, rushes, freezes, or lashes out, letting the disturbance itself dictate the next move. A trained mind, in Nitobe's account, simply doesn't let the disturbance reach that far. The fear can still be present as raw sensation without being given the authority to steer anything. That's the actual mechanism behind. Nothing ruffles the equanimity of his spirit, not the absence of a difficult feeling, but a mind that has practiced, repeatedly, not handing that feeling the wheel. It's worth being honest that this is a slower path to composure than most modern advice on the subject promises. There's no single breathing technique or mental trick that reliably produces the kind of serenity Nitobe describes, applied to a genuinely serious threat, on the first try. What Bushido offered instead was a longer, more demanding process, repeated, deliberate exposure to manageable versions of pressure, sustained over years, until the nervous system itself recalibrates what counts as an emergency worth disrupting your composure over. Musashi didn't arrive at Ganryūjima because he'd learned a technique for calming himself down that morning. He arrived calm because that morning wasn't meaningfully different, to his trained mind, from dozens of comparably dangerous mornings that had already come before it. This also explains why samurai discipline treated small, seemingly unrelated hardships as genuinely valuable rather than simply unpleasant obstacles to endure and move past quickly. Cold, hunger, fatigue, tedious and repetitive drilling, minor humiliations absorbed without any visible reaction at all, none of these were treated as unfortunate costs of training to be minimized or avoided wherever possible. They were the actual curriculum. Each one, deliberately faced rather than avoided, chipped away at the reflex that treats discomfort as an emergency requiring an immediate reaction, and replace it with the far more useful reflex of simply continuing to function while the discomfort is present. Practically, this means treating every minor moment of pressure in your own life as deliberate practice for the major ones still ahead. A frustrating conversation, a public setback, an uncomfortable risk, these are the equivalent of a samurai's daily drilling. Not distractions from the real test but the actual material the real test will eventually be built from. Rehearse your response to smaller versions of pressure on purpose, the way Musashi appears to have rehearsed nearly everything in the years leading up to Ganryūjima, and the larger version, whenever it eventually does arrive, won't feel nearly as unfamiliar as it would have otherwise, which, according to Bushido's own account of what actually produces serenity, is the entire difference between a mind that shatters under real pressure and one that simply keeps functioning through it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Twice a day, we bring you Bushido straight from the source, the real words of the man who actually wrote the code down, and the real warriors who lived it out.